So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be the host of this brief conference dealing with the problems of post-war Yugoslavia, actual Serbia. Some 20 years ago, within several months, we shall not celebrate, but we have to keep in mind 20 years after aggression of NATO states against Yugoslavia, which had like a conclusion total destruction of the rest of Yugoslavia. I was in the head of the last demonstration before bombardment, as well as during the first demonstration in Prague, the first day of bombardment. We Czechs, we feel as a very big problem for all of us Europeans what happened by destruction of this friendly Central Balkanic state. Now we are facing new challenges. We are facing the further efforts to destruct Serbia, and we have to defend the rule of right, not only in Western Europe, not only Central Europe, but also in the whole of Balkanic. That's why majority of states didn't recognize that there has to be some state like Kosovo where the territory lies in the heart of all Serbs and all people knowing what was Serbia in the past tense. That's why we assembled here, and that's why I have an honor to invite my esteemed guests, previous minister, and all other three esteemed speakers, including a very important person from France who was engaged during last years also in Yugoslavia as one of the heads of military mission.
First of all, I would, on behalf of this small group of 3 persons with good willing, to thank Mr. Kohlicek for giving us opportunity to come here and to present our views, particularly on Kosovo and Metохијi issue, but in a connection with the European politics taking place on the ground and the position of the Serbia as a state within that complex of problems. So, well, I will devote my presentation mostly to the European Union engagement. It was present in Kosovo issue a long time ago, during the 90s and by the beginning of 2000, but directly through EULEX mission, and because already 10 years took place this mission there. I would like to devote this presentation to some kind of the estimation of the outcome and the consequences of their presence within southern Serbian province, Kosovo and Metохијi. That's why the main subject of my presentation is 10 years failure of the force and violence solution. 10 years failure deals with the European Union engagement. We know that the violent solution was imposed to Serbia since 1999, last century, by the beginning of the bombing of Serbia, and it had been lasting since that time until today. But for my presentation, it is important that I focus my talk to the European Union mission, because after the mission was established, it was a full engagement and full responsibility of the European Union on the ground, what is taking place in Kosovo, particularly with regard of its judiciary and the other very important aspects of the public administration. So, 10.5 years ago, the Assembly of Kosovo, institution established by the UN Security Council Resolution 1244, unilaterally proclaimed independence. It was obvious violation of the valid international law documents. Immediately after the declaration on Kosovo independence has been announced, leading Western powers recognized the unilateral act. 21 member states of the EU did the same. All of them, increased by dozens of small countries all over the world, under USA leadership, have counted that so-called supervised independence and later recognition by Serbia could introduce Kosovo from illegal to a legal status. The operation of the EULEX, the EU civil mission, was established in the eve of the independence proclamation by the beginnings of 2008. Its goal has been just a transformation Kosovo status from illegal to legal one through assisting the domestic institutions in achieving state-alike administration standards. More than that, the substantial goal of the mission has been the shifting of the valid UN Security Council Resolution 1244 and its arrangement. The resolution has actually been the crucial obstacle to Kosovo independence, since pointing out the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Serbia, ex-Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and establishing the Kosovo institution in the self-governing mode. The rule of law EULEX mission, however, has been far away from the idea and practice of rule of law. Its establishing was legally deficient, since it was launched by two UN documents which by no means have a legal status. The first one is Kosovo report by Secretary General, and the second one is the presidential statement of the Security Council, both in November 2008. Both of them do not have a legal status within the hierarchy of the UN legal documents. Besides, the content of the mission was taken over from so-called comprehensive proposal for Kosovo political settlement, Ahtisaari's plan, the document that has never become the official one in the UN organization. Finally, in the internal EU legal relations, it will be very interesting for Mr. Kohliček. Within internal EU legal relations, the mission was allowed by common action, document enacted in February 2008, the act that is normally being preceded by higher act called common position. But the common position was never accepted. The European Union never came to total consensus about Kosovo issue. We know that 5 member states did not recognize Kosovo, and what concerns the other who recognize, it was just the outcome of opportunity position of the little states vis-a-vis the leaders of the Kosovo recognition, Germany, France, Great Britain, and we can easily conclude that this number of 21, 22 with Croatia, who became later the member of the European Union, is somehow blown. So it is just the drafting of the legal environment of Kosovo recognition and legal environment of the engagement of the EU in Kosovo. As I said, it was deficient very much in terms of legal base. 10.5 years after Kosovo, Kosovo looks like an Europe's black hole much more than before 2008. Economically, it is far from the most backwarded spaces in the continent, with totally unsustainable and dependent economy. The biggest part of it has been occupied by grey economy led by family class, with prevailing participation of the KLA leaders. Before the independence has been proclaimed, the unemployment was approximately or more than 40%, out of it 70% within young population. But there is no improvement today. It is interesting. During last years, Kosovo is being faced with the mass economic migration to the Western countries, which counts more than 500,000 persons today. Political life is uncertain with frequent premature elections and unstable institutions. Particularly, legal system is today dysfunctional with permanent interference of political actors. Remaining Serbs population suffers mostly under mentioned conditions. Particularly southern from Ibar River, where Serbs live scattered in the enclaves. Their everyday life is marked by poverty, uncertainty, and fear. They worry for their lives, property, security, material existence, without hope in protection their human rights on the ground. In such circumstances, the return of approximately 200,000 violently displaced persons has become a forgotten story. The responsibility of EULEX mission for the grey Kosovo situation should by no means be neglected. As a rule of law mission, it was explicitly charged for reform of judiciary possessing the exercising powers. It was an astonishing matter when its official speaker announced in May this year that EULEX has successfully finished its mandate, and accordingly it should be transformed to an advisory one. Kosovo has allegedly become a normal state which does not need any international supervising mechanism in civil matters. Presenting such a position, the EU has expressed unprecedented political cynicism. Actually, it acted as a performer of the magic ritual, covering up the reality by fiction. The reality of legal chaos should magically be transformed into rule of law reality. This epochal failure of the EU was not the obstacle for it to take a mediation role in so-called Brussels dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. The goal of dialogue is supposed to be a comprehensive normalization of the relation between the two. Actually, the real goal is recognition of Kosovo by Serbia. Through act of recognition, Kosovo is supposed to be internationally recognized state. If Serbia recognizes Kosovo, Resolution 1244 de jure loses its legal meaning, since the voluntary renouncement of the part of its territory committed by the state is not in contradiction with international law. Brussels dialogue and adequate agreements launched in 2013 and 2015 actually do not mention word recognition. It only states that each of agreed issues should be carried out in accordance with the Kosovo Constitution and the laws. One another EU document, however, announces the real intention of the EU. It is so-called negotiation position of the EU concerning the accession negotiations between Serbia and the EU. It was announced by the beginning of 2014. Here, in this document, one can easily read in Article 23 that in particular phase of negotiation between EU and Serbia regarding accession, Serbia and Kosovo should comprehensively normalize their relations by signing a legally binding agreement. This tricky formulation avoids word recognition, but points out its very meaning. That's the problem. It means practically that the EU has been blackmailing Serbia's accession process by Kosovo recognition. The basic problem here is the fact that the EU in the long run is not ready and able to enlarge. This is the issue for our EU MP. It has been facing with deep and long-lasting internal crisis, not allowing even an idea of enlarging. That is why the EU transformed the very reason of its enlargement policy from integration matter to geopolitical one. In that sense, it badly looks for success, having in mind that its security and defense policy is generally an unsuccessful page in its history. That is why the EU forcefully insists for Serbia to recognize Kosovo, offering in return the eternal path to the EU. Come to conclusion. We can easily say that the EU has, during the last 10.5 years, created a typical outlaw state, Kosovo, whose existence is permanently endangering the whole region. That is my contribution, and we can discuss about that, which is very shortly written assessments without many proofs and facts and so on, since we do not have enough time to do that in 10 or 12 minutes. But
so thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. I would like to pass the word to my esteemed colleague. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to thank the European Parliament, especially to Mr. Kohlicek, for organizing this conference. The topic is more than up to date because there are pressure by the Western countries to resolve Kosovo's problem as soon as possible, but I'm afraid that such an approach can only lead to a worse situation and to even more tensions, especially now that there are increased tensions at the international level. Problems cannot be resolved by imposing violent and illegal solution, and above all, it can not lead to a permanent peace. Imposing violent solutions can only bring even greater violence, and we can clearly see it today in Kosovo. NATO, led by United States, carried out an aggression against Yugoslavia in 1999 without an UN Security Council decision, and thus replaced the rule of international law by the rule of power. After 78 days of bombing of Yugoslavia, the Kumanovo Agreement was signed, on the basis of which the United States Security Council Resolution 1244 was adopted. This resolution is still the only legitimate framework for resolving the issue of Kosovo and Metохији. However, we are witnessing that the Western powers are persistently trying to solve the Kosovo problem outside the UN, because some countries that have the possibility of veto in the UN do not agree with the violation that is being done over international law. From 2005 to 2007, negotiations were conducted between Belgrade and Pristina with the mediation of the UN, which did not bring any results. Since the start of the negotiations, Serbia has been open to various proposals for a wide autonomy model for Kosovo, and Kosovo representatives wanted to talk exclusively about an independent Kosovo. The UN has Security Council appointed the former Finnish President Martti Ahtisaari as the UN envoy in the negotiation. At the beginning of 2007, Martti Ahtisaari offered a solution for Kosovo status, which presupposed so-called supervised independence. The submitted document only respected the interest of Albanian side, violated international law and the territory integrity of Serbia. It was unacceptable for Serbia, and the Serbian side refused to adopt such a plan. As the plan could not be enacted in the UN because of the veto of Russia, Western countries began to build independence of Kosovo outside the UN. The Provisional Kosovo authorities adopted a declaration of independence in Pristina on February 17, 2008, which was based on the Ahtisaari's plan, which also included a status solution for Kosovo. Although the situation on international scene is increasingly less in favor of Kosovo separatism, the internal situation in Serbia has led to a new escalation of the problem. For the international affair of Serbia, the West is also largely responsible for supporting those political structures that were recommended as more cooperative in resolving the Kosovo problem under the protectorate of the Western powers. After the proclamation of Kosovo independence, the West removed from the political scene those structures that were opposed to Kosovo independence and that acted to suppress the separatist intentions. The key moment for the further course of resolving the Kosovo issue was the relocating of the negotiation on Kosovo and Metохији from the UN to the European administration. However, here it is important to emphasize the following facts. It has been decided that technical negotiations are conducted under the auspices of the EU, but the issue of the status is unrelated to the technical negotiations and is only under the competence of the UN. As the Western powers failed to implement the Ahtisaari plan through the UN because of the acceptance of Serbia, supported by Russia as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, they started to implement that same plan in a different manner, with the objective that when the plan is actually implemented on the ground, they will ask the UN to accept the factual situation. Brussels negotiations between Belgrade and Pristina have continued at a higher level from 2012, and instead of being kept in the technical format, they were raised to the level of talks between the two prime ministers and now between two presidents. They resulted in the signing of the first agreement of principles that regulate the normalization of relations, also known as the Brussels Agreement of 2013, in which the parties agreed on the integration of the state institutions of Serbia into the system of Kosovo institutions and the establishment of the community of Serbian municipalities. The Brussels Agreement that was signed corresponds to the needs of implementing the Ahtisaari plan, and its implementation is the last blow to the Serbian institutions in Kosovo and Metохији. It violates the Constitution of the Republic of Serbia, although the state of Serbia fulfilled all the obligations of the Brussels Agreement. The Albanian side did not fulfill any of them. Even the establishment of the community of Serbian municipality under the Constitution and the laws of independent Kosovo. Instead, the Kosovo authorities begin forming the Kosovo Army, which is a direct violation of the UN Resolution 1244. We are now in the Brussels final negotiations that brought no results, but the EU wants to end these negotiations by May 2009, when the new elections for the European Parliament will take place, with a comprehensive peace agreement to be signed by Belgrade and Pristina. Such a document, compiled by the EU, is already largely supported by the Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić and so-called Kosovo President Hashim Tači. This document includes the idea of demarcation between Serbs and Albanians, advocated by the President of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, and it involves a redrawing of the existing borders of Serbia and the surrender of almost the entire territory of Kosovo and Metохији to Albanians, as well as the southern part of central Serbia. In return, Serbia should retain control over a small part of northern Kosovo, where Serbs are a majority, and this should be presented as a success for Serbia. The comprehensive peace agreement is also based on the Ahtisaari's plan on Kosovo independence. This document should also serve to pressure primarily Russia to allow independent Kosovo to enter the UN. In that sense, the document itself calls for the amendment of the UN Resolution 1244. I am hereby soliciting those of you who are in the European Parliament to do everything you can to avoid the signing such a document, because it represents a harsh violation of international law, of the Constitution of the Republic of Serbia, and represents a way for the legalization of a criminal state. Next year, 20 years after the NATO aggression against Serbia, the United States would like to end the issue of Kosovo. But ending with Kosovo, it opens up a Pandora's box that can destabilize many other regions. There are many more potential Kosovos throughout Europe, and the legalization of separatism would bring them new perspectives. By signing the comprehensive peace agreement with Pristina, the President of Serbia would free Albanians from responsibility for all the crimes they committed, but also would relieve NATO of the responsibility for the aggression that was committed against our country. The claims that the signing of comprehensive peace agreement with Pristina will bring a lasting peace to the Balkans has no basis, as the territorial pretensions of the Albanians will not stop. The Albanians adhere to the concept of Greater Albania, which implies the unification of all the territories inhabited by Albanians. Redefining the borders can be a particularly dangerous example for Europe and could spark new conflicts. Certainly, the interfering of the West in the sovereignty of other states is a very dangerous practice. We have seen the examples of in political processes in Serbia, where there was a degradation of the rule of law, democracy and freedom, and all this is imposed by Western countries that try to present themselves as democratic. The elections have become useless as national governments meet the demands of Brussels. There is no democracy and respect for the will of the people. We have seen on the example of Kosovo how they make politicians out of terrorists and how they can dismantle the legal institution of a state in order to give the power to the illegal ones. The Serbian people is opposed to the violent dismemberment of the territory of Serbia and to the attempts to separate Kosovo and create a special state. The Serbian Orthodox Church confirmed at the Church Council that preservation of Kosovo and Metохији as an integral part of Serbia by all international standards and in accordance with the Serbian Constitution and with the UN Resolution 1244 does not mean confrontation with the world, but rather the affirmation of the position that without the fundamental rights and freedoms of the nation, its identity, spirituality and culture, there cannot exist a stable long-term solution. It is necessary that the issue of resolving the problem of Kosovo be returned to the international legal framework and constitutional legal framework of Serbia. The Brussels negotiations have failed and they must be suspended immediately. The only place to resolve the Kosovo issue are the UN. Otherwise, European countries will bear historical responsibility for the collapse of the rule of law, the promotion of separatist movements, the destabilization of the Balkans, and the violation of the integrity of the state of Serbia. I'm afraid that with Serbia, the European countries will also pay a too high price for the problems that will be caused by the collapse of international law and of the rules by which the world was functioning, if such tendencies do not stop. At the very end, I would like to thank Mr. Jacques Agar, who commanded the French forces of KFOR in Kosovo and Metохији, because he is today here with us to once again testify about the experience that he experienced in Kosovo, and the Serbian people will be eternally grateful for his courage and his honesty. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your statement, and I will pass the word to the highest ranked commander of UN units in Kosovo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kolicek, for welcoming us here in the European Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to be here today at the invitation of the Center for Geostrategic Studies in Belgrade, here in the European Parliament in Brussels. As a senior French officer, I served in Macedonia and then in Kosovo in the first half of 1999. When I was posted at the French Special Operations Command in Paris, I was appointed as the head of the Joint Special Operations Group that intervened before the deployment of the French KFOR brigade under the command of NATO in Kosovo. That's the reason why I'm speaking today, having published a few years ago a little book with a deliberately provocative title, Europe is Dead in Pristina. If you have not read it yet, I recommend you to do it. You will find my testimony on this tragic period. If one speaks about Kosovo, its full name is Kosovo Metохији. It's indeed not possible to ignore the past of this region, of course the ancient past, the cultural and religious past, the past that Serbs and Orthodox, which is always present through the innumerable and very old monuments, churches, monasteries, all around the province. But also the recent past, and especially the events of the 90s that culminated in 1999 in the war imposed on Serbia for the support of NATO and the European Union to the KLA Albanian-speaking rebellion. It is in this context that I myself intervened in Kosovo at the head of French Special Forces under British command. What struck me in Kosovo in 1999 was, first of all, the very large misinformation that preceded and justified the NATO aggression against Serbia. Indeed, it's because the word genocide was pronounced by the American President, Bill Clinton, and also his Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who will give the fateful and false picture of 100,000 dead in Kosovo, that the NATO will allow itself to attack Serbia in March 1999 after the unacceptable demands made by the Allies to the Serbs during the Rambouillet negotiations, which forced them to refuse the diktat they wanted to impose on them. However, it will be seen after 1999, after the 1999 war, that the number of victims from all origins, of all ethnic groups, civil and military, will be less than 6,000. Of course, 6,000 is far too much, but this has nothing to do with a genocide. What struck me also next was the disproportion of the military means used by the Allied coalition against Serbia. I remember in particular massive and endless aerial bombardments which caused many innocent victims, not to mention the physical and psychological ones. It was clear that it was a question of forcibly proceeding with the separation of the Republic of Serbia and its province of Kosovo Metохији. What could even stay to the amputation of one of its most important territorial entities. And not just any, because while Kosovo Metохији is today inhabited mostly by Albanians, this has not always been the case, and this province remains for the Serbs the historical, the spiritual, the cultural and identity core of their nation. Of course, UN Resolution 1244, still in force now, never belied since 1999, allowed a de facto separation, a separate administration for an unspecified period, but recalling Kosovo's membership to the Republic of Serbia. Nevertheless, the goal has been reached, and it's after the anti-Serb pogroms of 2004, intended to continue and speed up the ethnic cleansing. In 2008, the scenario was that was the aim of Albanian rebellion, supported by the Western powers. That's it to say, the unilateral declaration of independence of the Republic of Kosovo, so-called Republic of Kosovo. This new so-called state is thus born of a situation of unjust war provoked on the European continent against a European state who wasn't in war between his neighbors, certainly not member of the Union, by other European states, remotely controlled by the United States of America, to punish Serbia for wanting to maintain the very principle of its sovereignty and territorial integrity by fighting an armed rebellion developing in the province of Kosovo and Metохији. What will we say tomorrow in France, our French people, if the department of Seine-Saint-Denis, for instance, now mostly populated by foreigners coming from North Africa, intended to proclaim themselves as a so-called independent republic? This is basically the very problem of Kosovo and our problem today in Europe. This NATO aggression against Serbia over Kosovo in 1999 constitutes a violation of international law, a violation of the respect that we have to do for sovereignty of states, a violation of intangible respect for borders. And this puppet state, without identifier resource, unsustainable as such, is now a source of very strong tensions throughout the Balkans. We see it every day or almost. The United Nations doesn't recognize the so-called Republic of Kosovo, which is still not recognized by a large number of states in the world, including some European states that are members of European Union. And recently, 10 states that recognized before the Republic of Kosovo finally gave up this recognition. The UN Resolution 1244, which recalled as basic principles the unalienable membership of Kosovo Metохији to the Republic of Serbia, heir of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and the necessary demilitarization of KLA, is thus violated twice. First, by the unilateral declaration of independence of the Albanian rebels, and then now by their willingness to turn their local security force into a real army. This Resolution 1244, still in force, forbids it strictly. Today, the Kosovo authorities practice a sneaky police hostile to the Serbian, Roma and Gorani minorities, in particular hostile to the maintenance of Orthodox monasteries and religious communities who live there for a long of centuries and pray there. On a daily basis, it's not good to be Serbian, Roma or Gorani in the province of Kosovo, Metохији today. All persecutions, vexations, spoliations, physical violence are possible at any time for anybody. It has seen many times recently during the visit, for instance, of Serbian High Representative Marko Đurić, who was appalled by the Kosovo police while visiting Serbian enclaves in Kosovo. We saw it during the arbitrary arrest of the French Arnaud Gouillon, president of the remarkable French NGO Solidarité Kosovo. We saw it last Friday at dawn with the violent intervention of the same Kosovo police against Serbian citizens of Mitrovica, who we don't know since they began. Obviously, the so-called Republic of Kosovo is anything but a state of law, except a democratic state where the rights and dignity of the human person are respected. The fact this puppet state is today supported by large amounts of European public money by the European Union is for me a real subject of shame and indignation. I owe myself to say it here. It's also true, of course, that to see his president, his so-called president, received in Paris with great pomp for the victory centenary of 1918 is also a subject of shame for me, grandson of two French officers badly wounded during the Great War, and grandnephew of an officer who was killed in the north of Macedonia. Moreover, I learned yesterday that the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama presented at a joint meeting of the governments of Albania in Peć, in Kosovo, the idea of a national project of unification of the Albania and Kosovo. Edi Rama called on Kosovan Prime Minister Ramush Haradinaj to start developing a joint strategy for the unification of Albanians by 2025. The old dream of the League of Brethren, would it be about to be realized? In any case, I have never personally thought that the Republic of Kosovo has a future. I said it and I wrote it. This puppet state has no solution, has no other solution than to join back the motherland, Republic of Serbia, or to merge with conquering Albania. But it would be a real hold-up, as iniquitous as incredible, which would be achieved in a quarter century by the mafia clans of Kosovo with the blessing of international bodies, and maybe of the European Union. If that were to happen, it would certainly be the beginning of a period of very great unrest, very big troubles in all the Balkans. We Frenchmen have seen in 1871 what happened to Alsace-Lorraine, annually annexed at the time by Germany. It took almost 50 years, then a world war and its millions of deaths, unfortunately, for these French provinces finally returned to France, their motherland. Let us be clear, it will be the same with Kosovo in due course. I have no doubt about it. That's why, if we want to avoid a new kindling of the region, it's essential to return to the fundamentals that UN Resolution 1244 very well expresses in its own way. Kosovo and Metохији is an integral and inalienable part of the Republic of Serbia. That it has a certain autonomy is perfectly conceivable, but with respect for the sovereignty and the integrity of the Serbian state. The latter must be restored, and the European Union will grow by helping with all its influence. It would be the only real means of guaranteeing future generations in this part of Europe a just and lasting peace. Finally, let me add that reconciliation between the different communities populating Kosovo is only possible if the whole truth of history is restored and if the responsibilities of each are well defined. That is why it seems to me essential that the judicial procedure initiated within the European Union a few years ago, I think it was in 2014, concerning war crimes and in particular the abominable organ trafficking denounced in the Dick Marty report, and which was expected to give results next year, the next year in 2015, will be reactivated and completed. That's essential for me. The credibility of the European Union is at stake. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your ample statement. I think it is very important that even we foreigners see that Kosovo has to be maintained as it was. That means as an integral state of Serbia, integral part of this important Balkan state.
Of course, I agree with you.
Thank you. I think it's time to give the final word to the representative of Serbian Parliament, Skupština.
Thank you.
Floor is
Thank you
yours.
very much. The EU is blackmailing Serbia with surrender of Kosovo and Metохији. I bid a welcome to everyone present, and I thank you for your attendance and the given opportunity to talk about Kosovo and Metохији, the key political issue in Serbia, and I dare say, the question of the Serbian states and the Serbian people's very survival. The importance of Kosovo issue is even greater when we consider the current political and security situation in the world. It seems that US administration is in a rush to resolve the issue of Kosovo and Metохији and Serbia's membership in NATO. Naturally, the US fulfills its interests in the Balkans by pushing EU operatives on the forefront and taking advantage of the EU administration for protecting their own interests. I would like to talk about the blackmail Serbia is subjected to as a candidate of membership in the UA by that same EU administration. Unfortunately, affairs in the Balkans were often an excuse for conflicts between world powers through history. Therefore, Serbia has been a place of overlapping interest due to its geographical position. I mentioned all this so you can understand the overall concept and the bigger picture of our current situation in Serbia. But what is especially important is that war left consequences on the life in Serbia, and every war is ended with treaties according to the international law called laws of war. When I say war, I mean the year 1999, when NATO bombed former Yugoslavia without approval from UN Security Council, violating all human rights and customs of war, and it ended with a military technical agreement in Kumanovo, Resolution 1244 of the Security Council, which guarantees territorial integrity of our country and mentions only a meaningful autonomy for Kosovo Albanians. There has not been an overreaching agreement for the 1999 war, according to the international law so far. But after almost 2 decades of Serbian frog being boiled, Serbia is offered to sign the so-called legally binding agreement with the failed country of Kosovo in the presence of the official of EU negotiators. The Brussels Agreement from April 2013 is very detrimental to Serbia's interests, and it was signed by the regime currently in power. The Brussels Agreement may be annulled after a change of government in Belgrade. In essence, due to laws of war, Western powers need the Resolution 1244 to be practically invalidated through a legally binding agreement, which could not be revised by any later changes of government in Belgrade and would be very difficult to rescind. It is especially contentious that Kosovo Albanians already have a motherland, Albania, and the right of self-determination does not exist for national minorities, which Albanians are in Serbia. By signing a legally binding agreement, which has been forced to do by the EU, Serbia will recognize the amputation of its province as a consequence of the 1999 war. Ever since Peace of Westphalia from 1648, the agreement which created the base of the international system of sovereign states, and particularly after 1880, when international law was accepted as the model of resolving territorial disputes in the world, there have been no cases like ours, of a state amputating a part of its territory by itself. Even the anti-colonial movements from the second half of the 20th century were not based strictly on ethic claims. We had the case of Biafra in Nigeria, which is in certain parts analogous to the Kosovу and Metохији case, and in which the aforementioned territory was recognized by multiple states, Gabon, Haiti, Tanzania, Zambia, and so on, as a sovereign state, but international law was on Nigeria's side. And this secessionist territory was returned to Nigeria's control, even though Biafra received very open support from numerous Western countries, including Vatican. Self-declared Kosovo does not have international subjectivity, at least until Serbia agrees to it, and I hope it will not, because it is not the will of the people of the Republic of Serbia. Normalization of relations is an acceptable term only if we agree about subjectivity, which does not exist in the case of Kosovo. For us, they are not a state, and the resolution of these issues should be returned to the United Nations Security Council. Otherwise, if the current president of Serbia is allowed to sign a legally binding agreement without the will of Serbian people, relations in the Balkans will be permanently damaged, and the hazard from a bigger conflict in the Balkans would not be ruled out. The policy of surrendering the Serbian southern province would not be possible without autocracy, and autocracy in power would not have its base without the policy of surrender. Many today do not see that contemporary Serbia is a double loser, and even fewer see that it will remain such a loser for a long time, unfortunately. Kosovo is the biggest obstacle in Serbia's path to the European Union, and however is ready to remove it is good enough, whatever they are like. But they are missing another part of the objective calculation. Since membership in the EU is independent from the surrender of southern province, the EU, as a true guarantor of the autocracy, has no real reason to change its instance toward the current government in Serbia. In reality, it proved to be most efficient in the real politic dynamics of Serbia-European path, which will, as we can see, last a long time. In addition to that, the surrender of Kosovo is not the only condition for the support of the West to the autocratic regime. The recognition of Kosovo is not required for some singular reason, but for strategic reasons. In such a framework, Serbia owns the West a lot more. Desired delivery of favors is not possible in a regime where democratic rules of the game are respected systemically, and with them the will of the majority. The fact that the Serbian government decided to surrender Kosovo and Metохији is not an accident. Namely, only a government like this could do it. For such deeds, it's as good as they come, so informal, efficient, ruthless, and arrogant, above all, disciplined, like the army on exercise. That is why it abolished the practice of being follower of constitution, the laws and international norms, the rule of transparency of operation, reporting about the progress and outcome of negotiations, the practice of parliamentary discussion, dialogue with the opposition. Serbian movement Двери has for longer than a year now, before every parliamentarian meeting, demanded the topic of Kosovo and Metохији to be added on agenda, but without avail, because the ruling majority does not want it. Could the Western bureaucrats have imagined a government in Serbia better than this one? They could not even dream that the consciousness-changing experiment would be so fruitful, at least in these ruling circles. Then why would they not treasure them so, when it's not just Kosovo, it's the project of complete submission of the so-called Serb factors in Balkans? The EU is first asking for resolving negotiation chapter 45, and then everything else, which is actually a noose the EU had around Serbia's neck for a while now. Truthfully speaking, in Serbia, democracy, rule of law, media freedoms, and even economic development first started declining when the first government intentionally entered in inventory to surrendering Kosovo and Metохији in steps. That was in the middle of 2080, and it coincided with the signing of stabilization and accession agreement with the EU. In late April of that year, the first constitutional and legal violation was made, when an unauthorized portion of the acting government signed this international agreement during the transitional term of the government. Everything that happened afterward was the outcome of a planned sequence of events, with the process of surrendering the province and the downfall of democracy going hand in hand. Serbian democracy crashed on the problem of Kosovo and Metохији. To maintain peace, international law should be reaffirmed and disputes should be resolved by diplomacy, with equal treatment of all participants in international relations who possess subjectivity. To conclude, the hope of Serbian people is that both Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China will, as permanent members of the UN Security Council, continue to be on the side of international law in the interest of peace for everyone on the Balkans. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your statement. I think we have to develop some brief discussion after those 4 statements. So, who would like to add something?
Maybe better who would like to ask something.
Yeah.
Because we have, for us it is important to hear whether there is some estimation of this approach we presented here, and if there is some contradictions or unfinished projects to point out it. Just for us it would be important to take it with us, because we are fighting from day to day in very political environments. It is more or less oriented to the European Union, which means automatically renouncement of Kosovo. And on the other side, our opposition is now consolidating, because they came about from the previous government who was also ready to start this policy of abandoning Kosovo. So the people who are approaching with common sense on that problem, having in mind the rules for the life, not only political for the state, but also for the society, are in minority in nowadays Serbian public opinion. Although I think that it is actually majority who is silent for the time being. That's why we need some input from people who would will to continue our public debate there, in order to convince the people that this Christian policy is not yet good direction. The consequences are very, very bad for a region, generally speaking. That's why we think. I mean, when we speak about Kosovo, it is not only the issue of Serbia in terms of territorial integrity, but Macedonia is endangered. Totally. Southern Greek is endangered. They had a big problem in the process of delineation, the borders between Kosovo and Montenegro, because the Albanian demands were very unmoderate, looking for more and more territory. And if someone thinks that the problem would be stopped by Serbians delivering Kosovo to Albanians, it won't happen. There is no finishing of that process. So that is a problem that cannot be solved. You know, just like that, European Union is supporting Kosovo for independence. They suffered under Milosevic regime and so on. Their human rights were violated, and they deserved the state because they suffered and so on. It is very cheap story, but it is the official one in the Europe, in the public opinion. It is very difficult to change, but well, the capillary fight is also very important. So that's why.
In fact, one could say in European Parliament, many of my colleagues have no good insight into the Balkans. That's an old problem, because of no one knows that there are so many nations intermixed, and ethnic cleansing, which was the fact in Kosovo, is something that nearly no one could understand. I think that there's clear conclusion, because of next year we shall remember 20 years after aggression. Maybe we could prepare such a brief statement. Next year we shall remember 20 years after aggression of the NATO against Yugoslavia. After mass destruction of the country, UN Resolution 2012-44 has been adopted. As Martti Ahtisaari plan dealing with Kosovo independence failed, local Albanian authorities proclaimed independence 2009. This development is potentially very dangerous for European stability. We are strongly protesting against this illegal activity, which can, in the future, destabilize many European states. This is why we convoke politicians of the EU to stop these adverse activities. Kosovo and Metохији approved its disability to live under actual government as an independent entity. They are continuing in ethnic cleansing of the territory, irrespectively to the international legal basis. Kosovo and Metохији was, is, and will stay an integral part of Serbia. Do you agree with such a statement?
Yeah.
Totally.
I think it's clear.
Fully.
Because of this is what we can do. We have to announce to politicians that this is the actual state of art. And of course, I am always protesting about any part of agreements between accessing states and European Union which would like to align 100% their foreign policy and any of their policies with so-called European one. Because which is foreign policy of European Union? Is it French, German, or Benelux, or Italian, Spanish? That's the problem. We have no single European external policy, despite of the fact there is one commissioner. And I think the most important is for the US to retain their huge and biggest in the Europe basis bond deal. This is to the contrary of interest of all Europeans, I think. So this will be our effort in the future to retain territorial integrity of all these Balkan states. It's not only Serbia, it's also, as you properly mentioned, Macedonia, which maybe could in the near future be named Macedonia or Upper Macedonia with some adjective.
North.
And of course,
North.
North. Of course, it's the same case with all other states as Romania, because of in Romania there are also some streaming toward some secession of part of the territory. This is the same case in many other states of this part of Europe, and taking into account what was the outcome of referendum in Catalonia, we can see that it's not only concentrated to Balkan states.
Yes.
So it is very dangerous development if we shall approve one such particular case, because of it could be some future of many other states in Europe. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think it was very interesting to meet us. Help yourself with the coffee or tea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It has been prepared for you, and some sweets as well. Because of this theme is very bitter, we have to sweeten it a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
For your charity.